Hi, everybody. I'm Walter. I'm the Dutch mentor. Welcome back to the Smart Performance Podcast, where S stands for self-care, M for mindful growth, A for adaptive problem solving, R for rhythmic operation, T for thriving community, and of course, P for performance. Today we have Jasmine here, and we're going to talk about the topic of tough love. But as she told me, it's not the tough love I might be thinking about, like in ratio between love and tough love. So, hey, stick around. Let's see what she is all about and what it actually means. But most importantly, like always, it's actionable. At the end of this session, you should be able to do something with it because that's the only way we can make meaningful change. Jasmine, thank you much for joining me in the conversation. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Walter, for having me. As you said, I'm Jasmine Quianna, and I am author of Falling Madly in Self-Love. I'm a spiritual teacher, coach, mentor, and also a quantum light worker. And I started the Absolute Self-Love movement, which you said we'll get into in a second, but the Absolute Self-Love movement. And I wanted to really, my goal is for it to really be like a global international movement, especially with the things that are going on in the world today. I really feel like if we all fill ourselves with love, then it only like trickles out and ripples out into the rest of the world and kind of the rest of everybody else. So that's really like what is like I'm passionate about now, and I'm really focused on spreading the movement, spreading the word.
Good. It's almost like throwing that pebble in a pond and watching the ripples go out.
Literally.
It really is that case. Well, listen, I know that whenever we come up with a bright idea, it often came from a tough love learning environment. So tell me about your background. That why are you interested in it? What happened to you personally or around you that made you feel that you need to take action on this particular thought process?
So I've always been someone who was like, and probably your audience can relate. I'm pretty sure you have a lot of high achiever, ambitious people in your audience. So that's kind of where I started. The person who was always trying to hit the goals and achieve the things. I got the degrees, started the career, climbed the corporate ladder, did all the things that, they say is success, that we label as success, and went from like, broke and on government assistance to living in my parents' basement, all the things, all the way up to, making multiple six figures and getting the dream house and the car and like getting married, all the things, right, that we say is the dream life. And I was flat out miserable. I was more miserable than I was when I was at my brokest, when I was at my lowest. And so that forced me to kind of start looking elsewhere because, as high achievers, we're always trying to do more, like come up with a different strategy or a different tool or a different hack, right? And none of it was working. So I got to a point where I felt like I had tried everything, at least that I knew I could find or I knew to try, and even non-traditional things that I probably would have never tried. And it still wasn't working. So that's when I had, I guess you could call it more or less like a spiritual awakening, where I started to have all these different events and things happen to me where it forced me to look within. And I had already been going to therapy, so I'm not somebody who hadn't started like, the mindset journey or whatever. But even like the typical mindset practices and stuff that we do, even those things weren't hitting whatever was going on at the time. So as I started to look inward, and it really forced me to face who I am, not just a human being and as an individual, but on a, core deeper level, a soul having a human experience. And then that sent me down this whole pathway of realizing the reason why I was successful on the outside but miserable on the inside is because I was completely disconnected with myself. I had completely abandoned myself, dishonored myself, in ways that I didn't even know possible. So, what I even thought was success or what I thought I wanted, it wasn't coming from my truth because I was so disconnected from myself. I wore this mask to work, even around family members. That in and of itself was draining. That led to burnout. It's like all these different factors that tie back to me essentially abandoning and being disconnected from myself. That's what was leading me to this miserable place that I was in, even though outside it looked like, I had it all together. So that's what brought me here.
Very interesting. Listen, it is true tough love, and sometimes I would call negative experience, but these are really growth experiences. and becoming vulnerable and really understanding self is the good starting point. As I say, as Brene Brown says, and other people say, is that you do not need to do this alone, right? Often you need to come across a good mentor or peer or somebody
Right.
who can take you at the course and listen, girl, wake up. Right? There's a better way of doing this, and money is not everything, and I think we have been there. So tell me, so all that learning, right? And thank you for sharing that. You bottle that up and take me now to the topic of tough love. How did you develop the program, and what is it that you teach or guide people on today?
So, it's absolute self-love. And I wanted to use that phrase specifically because I feel like tough self-love in general, I feel like it's gotten watered down a lot through like the affirmation culture, the bubble baths, it's more so like self-care versus like truly self-love. And then I put absolute in front of it because a lot of times, how, at least for myself and then the people I've worked with, how we love ourselves tends to be tightly correlated with some external factor, right? Like how, I don't know, how much money's in your bank account or how many friends you have or how much, I don't know, food stuff you have. It's some external thing that determines whether how much you love yourself, how much you love your life. But absolute self-love means that it is independent of any external factor, independent of your resume, your bank account, your mom's approval, your child's approval. It's unwavering. It is, unlimited, infinite, regardless of what's happening, you love yourself unconditionally, right? So that's what absolute self love is about, but it's not at the same time. It does have a little bit of that tough love component because you do still have to hold yourself accountable. You still have to hold yourself responsible, be honest with yourself, have the reflections that you need to in order to, actually honor who you are and follow through on those things. So there is that tough component to it. Because I don't, a lot of people, when you hear self love, at least again for me in the beginning, it's like, well, I definitely don't need to love myself more. If anything, I need to be harder on myself because why else am I here, right? You don't realize that it is because of, for me, again, the way I was treating myself, the self criticism, the self judgment, the pushing, the striving, like you need to do more. You hit this goal. Okay, now what's next? That was what was causing the disconnect. So absolute self-love came to me not really by choice. I say it was more so like divine intervention. Because at first it slowly came as like all these the 12 pillars. That's what makes up the absolute self-love. And so I started getting all these different self-love related words like self-accountability and self-compassion, self-forgiveness, self-realization. And then it slowly came to me that these are going to be the 12 pillars, the framework that make up absolute self love. And then you're going to write a book about it, which, you heard my story. I was thinking I would be the last person to write a book about self love because I was just trying to get out of the self hate category pretty much. I was just trying to just be okay with myself. But no, that's what came about. And so as I started getting these essentially divine downloads of like what's going to go inside of the book. That's when the pieces came together to call it absolute self love because it is both, you know, the spiritual deep side of things, but at the same time, it's not spiritual bypassing in that you don't hold yourself accountable. You could just kind of do nothing and then everything is just going to come to you type of thing.
Very interesting concept, and it's good to get to that particular point to a deep personal experience. But tell me a story of a client that came to you, or somebody you work with, or yourself for that matter, that help you go through the discovery process. What I want to do is kind of give the audience an understanding of what that feels like to get to that particular point. And on the back end, I will bless you. We'll maybe take the top three pillars, and then of course the other nine pillars they can come and buy your book online to learn more about that. So tell me a story around this and how it works, how it was improved, how it is sustainable, and what the outcome of it is.
So I would say, and you said to incorporate the top three pillars.
No, no, you can talk about anything that you work with a client. How did you work with them? And what outcome did it deliver? Was it sustainable, as an example? Then we'll talk a little bit about, one or two of the pillars specifically.
Okay. So an example I would say, in the interest of time, I would say there was a client who already had a pretty good career in terms of their goals, what they wanted to hit, the titles, the money, things of that nature. But they were looking to get promoted, whether that was internally or externally. And they kept hitting like a roadblock. Everything looks good on paper, so to speak, but they weren't able to figure out like what was actually happening, um, you know, why they've been on interviews. So they couldn't figure out what was actually happening to why they weren't making that last step and getting the ultimate the job offer. So I had this particular person to record their interviews so that I could hear them and then we could play them back together and figure out, okay, well, what's being said during these interviews, because that's like you're hitting all the other steps. So essentially, we identified that there was subconsciously, of course, not consciously, a lot of limiting beliefs that were being portrayed in her responses to the interviews, the recruiters, the questions. And again, subconsciously, totally unaware. And anybody else listening, they may not have even noticed and thought that, well, what was wrong with that response or what was wrong with that answer. But it just had like subtle hints of not feeling good enough or feeling like you're good enough, not feeling like you're experienced enough. She didn't say this again verbatim, but in the way that she responded to the questions, and especially as a recruiter, you kind of can tell when people approach a situation with confidence versus the ones that are kind of, my apologies. All of a sudden I'm sneezing. But you can just kind of tell, right, who has that confidence and who doesn't, in the way that they're responding, the posture, demeanor, all the things. And her responses had this low key tone of, I'm not as confident, all those things in that bucket. And we, did the work to identify, okay, what's the story behind these limiting beliefs that came up? Why don't you feel like you're enough for this role? Why don't you feel like you have enough experience? What is the fear? We kind of picked apart all the different stories that were lying beneath the surface. And it took some time for her to really think about it and come up with, because she didn't even acknowledge, wasn't even aware that this was happening. So at first, acknowledging, admitting that, okay, I am doing this. Why am I doing this? Then get into that route. It boiled down to not truly, we can bring in the self-realization pillar, not truly understanding her own power and believing in who she was. And my apologies.
It's okay.
And so that automatically had her coming to these interviews feeling less than, feeling almost defeated, even though she's telling herself, like, I really want this job, has all these plans. This would be great. And this would be great for my career, all these different things. Subconsciously, she's coming to it thinking that, I'm not good enough. There's other candidates that are better. Why would they pick me? Having this subtle, undertone, answering that way. And so because she was already approaching the interview in that way, that's the frequency that she was given, whether she said it or not, that's the frequency that she's giving off. So when you get whatever signal you're giving off, that's what you're essentially asking the universe, God, to send back to you. More of that, right? So that's what we really worked on. We started doing identity work on, okay, what does this person that is confident, that, knows without a doubt, like, I'm a great fit for this role, they'd be lucky to have me, what type of beliefs and thoughts would this individual have? And laid all those out on paper and then worked for her to shift her identity into those thoughts, those belief systems of that individual, that person, and truly start embodying them, not just memorizing them or saying them as affirmations, but how does this person act? what's their posture? How do they show up? Not just during the interviews, but even in their daily lives. What are they eating? What are they watching? So that she's living in this identity and not just trying to hold it during the interview, right? So we did that. And then, of course, with the identity work, then comes the nervous system work, because now your nervous system is freaking out because of all these changes and it feels like it's a threat. So we also did the nervous system work behind it to create safety with, embodying this new identity. Because even though it's what's, quote unquote, best for us, or it's in alignment with our soul and our purpose, because we have been living this way for so long, that's what our nervous system is comfortable with. And any type of change is going to feel like a threat to your system. So it activates all the different threat pathways, and they have to be calmed down. We can't just overlook them. So we did the identity work, the nervous system work, and that helped resolve those limiting beliefs showing up during the interviews, and ultimately helped her, land the job.
Excellent. Listen, I think that's really a good way of introducing a couple of the pillars. Of course, um, it is we are self-destructive at times, right? And we need that tough love, that absolute tough love, in order to get back on track. And that is by being vulnerable to start up with, and seeking some help along the way. So tell me, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Jasmine Quianna, LinkedIn as well, Jasmine Quianna. And you can also find me and my book on Amazon. It's Falling Madly in Self Love, and it's available Kindle, paperback, and then it's also available on Audible.
Excellent, very good. So give me some closing thoughts for the audience, something that they can take away or they can start taking action on tomorrow morning.
Closing thoughts. I would say, first of all, that you cannot create your dream life while abandoning the one that has to live it, which is you. So, something that you can take action on within the next 24 hours would be to simply write down all the desires of your heart that you've been holding back on because you feel like they're too irrational or unrealistic or selfish or greedy, or it's childish, and it's not for an adult, a grown person. Literally let it all out. Give yourself permission to say what if, even if you're like, well, this is crazy. I like, why write it down? It's never going to happen. But literally give yourself permission to let it all out. Nobody's going to see it but you. And once you've gotten everything out that you feel like you've poured it all out, take the time to really sit in silence, no distractions, no phone scrolling, no TV, no nothing. Even if you have to go in the bathroom and hide from your kids, take the time to sit down and ask yourself where you are now versus what you wrote down, and really look at the gap in between the two and see how far and wide that gap is. And that'll tell you, in a nutshell, a quick summary kind of way of where you are on the absolute self-love scale. Are you at 0, where you are way off, or are you at a 10 where you're like fully in the absolute self-love frequency and living it all the way? And that can kind of give you a good start as to, okay, where am I when it comes to my relationship with myself, and where can I make it stronger? And then that is essentially the key to really any type of success in any area of your life.
Thank you for sharing that. I always call that dream big, act small. Right? It is that you can dream, but if you don't act, you forget about those dreams over time, right? So,
Exactly.
Jasmine, thank you very much for joining me on the show today. And again, to the audience, remember that you can sit here and listen and forget everything we said by tomorrow morning, or you can take an actionable takeaway, just like Jasmine said. You can see it in the show notes. Just follow that. Go buy your book. Go online. Communicate. And again, it is really up to you to go onto that journey. You can't wait for others to do that for you. Go to the Apple Store and look up the Dutch Mentor. Download your app, and again, you can find this episode and much more in there that will help you get onto your success story. Dream big, act small. Jasmine, thank you very much for joining me today in conversation. And I wish you good luck, and I hope you feel better real soon. And we'll talk again,
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
of course.